remember the day I died. Or at least, I remember my heart stopping. It happened so quickly. One moment I was on my daily run, feeling a tightness in my chest, and the next I was on the ground, gasping. I could feel my heartbeat falter, then vanish entirely. The world slipped from me like a fading memory. My vision became nothing but a blur of swirling lights and frantic shapes. A sudden, weightless feeling overtook me, and the pain in my chest dissolved. I felt as if I were floating above my own body, watching with distant curiosity as a passerby frantically called 911. Then something pulled me down, hard. It was as though a cold hand gripped my ankles and wrenched me into darkness. One moment I could see paramedics arriving in the distance. The next, I was falling deeper and deeper into an endless void. That darkness gave way to fire. Yet it was not normal fire. There was no warmth, no light, just suffocating heat and grim silhouettes that danced at the edges of my vision. I felt gravity shift. I was not falling anymore, but standing, as if summoned to an unholy stage. Around me, walls of black flame rose to impossible heights, hissing and roiling like serpents. A low, ceaseless growl reverberated through the atmosphere, prickling my skin with a terror I had never known. I tried to call out, but my voice died in my throat. The air tasted of ash and sulfur. Even breathing became a laborious task, as if each inhale risked filling my lungs with scorching embers. Somehow, despite the unimaginable heat, I shivered with cold dread. I realized that I was in a realm where the normal laws of nature did not apply. Fire was cold, darkness weighed on me like a physical force, and I could smell despair as tangibly as I could smell burning cinders. I began to walk, though I'm not sure why. Perhaps I hoped to find a way out, maybe some flicker of light or corridor leading back to my life. With each step, the ground sizzled beneath my feet, charring them through the soles of my shoes. I expected agony, but instead felt only a hollow numbness. Above me, the sky, or what passed for a sky, rippled with black smoke, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. Sometimes they looked like contorted faces, mouths open in silent screams. Then I started hearing voices. Some pleaded for help, others simply wailed in torment. They echoed all around me, an endless choir of anguish. I felt my blood run cold. This was not a dream. I was certain I had died, and the place I had landed in was not heaven. Ahead, a large, jagged gate materialized. It looked like twisted iron, covered in thick, dripping tar. Behind it, I could see countless figures in the distance, crawling on the ground. Their bodies glowed an eerie red in the flickering gloom. Yet something told me not to approach. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn back, to run. But I found my feet carrying me forward, like I was caught in a current. As I neared the gate, I saw more details. Those wretched figures were covered in something akin to chains. They were trying to stand, but each time they lifted themselves to their knees, an invisible force yanked them back down, condemning them to a perpetual cycle of struggling and failing. Their cries grew more desperate the closer I got. I thought I glimpsed a face I knew, my late uncle who had been notorious for his cruel behavior. My heart seized in my chest, but I pressed on. A voice boomed from above, deep and guttural, though I could not identify its source. The words were foreign, resonating with a hatred so profound it felt like shards of glass piercing my ears. The ground quaked, and I collapsed to my knees. In that moment, an intense fear took hold, and I questioned every bad thing I had ever done in my life. Had I deserved this fate? Was I to join the multitude of souls chained in agony? With trembling hands, I tried to cover my ears, But the voice persisted, growing louder, closer. It pounded in my head like a hammer. There was a sickening surge in my gut, as if the very air around me sought to crush me. My vision began to blur. Then the ground exploded beneath me. Ash and embers flew in all directions. In that eruption of black fire, I lost any sense of up or down, feeling only a sheer, unstoppable force dragging me deeper into the swirling flames. Out of nowhere, there came a sudden brightness, like a crack in the fabric of this hellish dimension. It was small, but blinding, and as soon as it appeared, the voice receded into the distance, replaced by a frantic beeping sound. I could feel a tug from above. Something or someone was pulling me out. My consciousness snapped back, and I crashed into my body, chest heaving. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. Monitors beeped all around me. Tubes and wires were attached to my arms, my chest. A nurse called out, startled by my sudden awakening. My throat felt raw, my entire body sore. The doctors explained that I had gone into cardiac arrest during my run. I was clinically dead for 3 minutes. For days, I kept my experience a secret, afraid people would think I was crazy. But the memories refused to fade. The sound of screaming souls, the flickering black flames, the oppressive darkness. It haunted my every thought. I questioned everything, my beliefs, my morality, my sense of self. Had I truly witnessed hell, or was it some elaborate vision created by my dying brain? Therapy didn't help much. The psychologist suggested it could have been hallucinations or a dreamlike response to oxygen deprivation. But I know what I felt. It was real enough to brand itself into my soul. The smell of sulfur lingered in my nostrils for weeks. Sometimes, in the dark corners of my room, I swore I could still see the shadows of that place dancing on the walls. I tried to change my life after that. I volunteered, donated to charity, reconciled with people I had wronged. But nightmares plagued me. Night after night, I woke up drenched in sweat, hearing that guttural voice echo in my head. I saw those tortured figures behind my eyelids, recalled their hopeless struggles, and remembered the feeling of something waiting for me just beyond that gate. I feared that if I died again, I would find myself there once more. This time, permanently. As the months passed, my body recovered, but my spirit did not. I could no longer see life the same way. Death had become an all too real spectre. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see a peaceful light. I saw a hole in the ground filled with smoldering black flames beckoning me. In time, I confessed everything to my closest friends and family. Some believed me. Others thought I was traumatized. But how could I share the gnawing terror of that place? How could I explain the absolute certainty that I had seen hell and that I might very well end up there again? I've come to accept my experience for what it is, a second chance, a warning. Though the nightmares persist, I try to use them as a reminder to live differently, to be kinder, more compassionate, and aware of the impact of my actions. Because I believe wholeheartedly that there is a real darkness out there, waiting for the unwary. I tasted it. I felt its cold flames and heard its monstrous lament. And I have no desire to return. When I was a child, I always heard stories of a gentle light that would lead souls to heaven. My grandmother used to say that angels would greet us, their wings radiant with warmth and love, guiding us to eternal peace. But nobody ever told me about the place I saw when I slipped away from life. It was not gentle, it was not warm, it was the antithesis of everything I once thought existed beyond the veil. My near-death experience occurred during an invasive surgery. I had collapsed from a ruptured appendix that led to severe complications. In the ambulance, I was in and out of consciousness, my abdomen in unbearable pain. The world flickered around me, a blur of paramedics, shining lights, and urgent commands. At the hospital, they whisked me into the operating room, and I felt the prick of the anesthesia. Almost immediately, I felt myself drifting off. Suddenly, I was not in the operating room anymore. There was no smell of disinfectant, no bright surgical lamps, no hum of machinery. Instead, I stood in the middle of a barren field, under a sky the color of dried blood. Everywhere I looked, the ground was cracked, as though scorched by a merciless sun. In the distance, I could see tall, leafless trees that contorted in agonizing shapes, like hands clawing at the sky. A bitter wind scoured my face, carrying with it the smell of decay. I walked forward, hesitant, not understanding what was happening. I called out, but my voice seemed swallowed by the desolate landscape. Each step sent a puff of dust into the air, and I noticed the dust was tinged a dark, almost rust-colored red. As I got closer to the twisted trees, I saw something hanging from their skeletal branches, fragments of chains, pieces of torn cloth. They swayed in the wind, scraping the bark, making a sound that could drive a person mad with dread. Then came the screams. They started off distant, like a faint echo of agony, but grew into an overwhelming cacophony. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to run in the opposite direction. But my body moved as if it had a will of its own, compelling me toward those tortured cries. Reaching the trees, I found a scene that turned my stomach. People, if they could be called that anymore, were bound to the trunks with barbed wire. Their skin bore deep lacerations from which black tar oozed like infected blood. Their eyes were hollow, and every scream seemed to rattle the wind. I tried to look away, but couldn't. The sight entranced me with horror. My chest felt tight, as though the very air was venomous. A voice, low and insidious, whispered just behind my ear. I turned, but saw no one. The whisper returned, forming words I could barely understand. "You belong here," it said. My heart hammered. I shook my head, stepping back, but the voice only grew louder, surrounding me, flooding my mind with dark promises. Desperate, I fled. I stumbled over the cracked earth, trying to outrun that disembodied voice and the nightmarish images. But no matter how far I ran, the scenery remained the same. Dead fields, twisted trees, and the echoes of torment. At one point, I collapsed to my knees, my will drained. A cold despair seeped into me. Maybe I belonged here after all. Maybe I was doomed. That was when I noticed a faint light flickering in the distance. Small, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably a light. It shone like a tiny beacon against the dismal gloom. Summoning what little hope remained, I pushed myself up and trudged toward it. With each step, I heard the whispering voice grow more agitated, as if furious I was leaving. The wind howled, sending swirling eddies of that red dust into my face. Finally, I reached what appeared to be a boundary, an abrupt line in the ground, where the cracked earth met a pool of darkness. Floating above this boundary was an orb of pale light, pulsating gently. It was no bigger than a fist, yet its glow felt immeasurably comforting. Tentatively, I reached out to it, half expecting my hand to burn or be bitten by some hidden evil. But it was warm. The moment my fingers touched that orb, I felt a tremendous force pulling me upward, like a cosmic undertow in reverse. The voice screamed in outrage, and I felt unseen hands clawing at my ankles. The agonized wails of the bound souls crescendoed, and I thought I might lose consciousness. Then a blinding flash overcame everything. I snapped my eyes open and found myself in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. My mouth was dry, my body limp, Slowly, I realized a ventilator tube was down my throat, helping me breathe. They told me I had nearly died, my heart stopping on the operating table for just over 2 minutes. They hailed it as a medical miracle that I was revived without brain damage. In the days that followed, I kept the memory of that place tucked deep inside. Sometimes I cried, overwhelmed by the recollection of those tortured figures and the certainty that I had walked through a realm of unimaginable anguish. When I tried to share the experience with a few close friends, they offered rational explanations: lack of oxygen, anesthesia, induced hallucinations, or some bizarre dream state. But none of their explanations could dispel the overwhelming dread I felt in my bones. I have not forgotten the cracked earth, the red sky, or the twisted trees. I have not forgotten the hollow eyes of those souls, trapped in perpetual torment, or that insidious voice claiming I belonged there. Most of all, I remember the flicker of light that saved me at the last moment. Ever since then, I've been on a quest for redemption, though I can't articulate precisely for what. I am gripped by the fear that when I die for good, that whispering voice will come for me again, and this time there will be no saving light. I've changed my ways, reached out to help others, been mindful of my intentions, and kept empathy at the forefront of my interactions. Even so, sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I hear a faint echo of that voice calling from beyond my dreams, waiting. For most of my life, I was an atheist. I believed the afterlife was a fantasy we clung to for comfort. I never gave the concept of heaven or hell much thought, dismissing them as relics of ancient myth. That changed the night of my accident. One careless driver ran a red light, and the next thing I knew, my car was spinning out of control. I have a hazy memory of an impact, the sharp sting of shattered glass cutting into my face, and then darkness. When I came to, I was no longer in my car. I stood on a cliff overlooking a vast black ocean. The sky raged with storm clouds that glowed red with sporadic lightning flashes. The thunder that accompanied them sounded hollow, like the groan of some slumbering beast beneath the waves. Despite the furious sky, there was no wind. Everything felt unnaturally still, as though the world held its breath. I peered over the edge of the cliff, feeling a deep dread coil in my stomach. Far below, the ocean churned, its waters dark and thick, not like normal water at all. I spotted faint movements on the shoreline, figures perhaps struggling in the surf. Something about their frantic motions made my skin crawl. Were they drowning, or were they being pulled under by something lurking in the depths? I wanted to look away, but a terrible compulsion forced me to watch. A wave crashed, and the lightning illuminated the scene. Dozens of people flailing in the black water, their eyes wide with terror. On the shore, lumps of seaweed or driftwood writhed and coiled, as though possessed by a demonic intelligence. A scream built in my throat, but stayed silent. My heart pounded so violently I feared it would burst. Suddenly, something touched my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. Instead, I saw a winding path down the cliff, leading to the shore. The path seemed to glow faintly, carved into the stone as if by molten claws. Inexplicably, I felt compelled to follow it. Each step down filled me with dread, but my legs moved as though they had a mind of their own. When I reached the bottom, the wet sand clung to my feet, leaching warmth from my body. I heard sobbing nearby and followed the sound. I found a man knee-deep in the water, arms outstretched, calling for help. Yet I couldn't see anyone near him. No lifeguards, no rescue teams, nothing but the swirling black surf. As I approached, the man turned to me, and I gasped. His face was featureless, smooth skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Despite this, I could sense his anguish. He reached out and I staggered backward, slipping in the sludge-like sand. A cold wave lapped at my ankles. In that moment, I felt something move beneath my feet, a shifting mass that coiled around my legs. I panicked, struggling to free myself. The faceless man, reached forward again, but before he could touch me, the water dragged him under in a single, swift motion. A primal terror took over, and I scrambled back onto the sand. My mind screamed for escape. I looked up at the path, only to see it crumble away like ash. Another flash of lightning lit the beach, revealing more figures. Some stood hunched over, as though in pain. Others crawled on all fours, leaving dark trails in the sand. All were silent except for anguished sobs, a broken chorus of despair. In the distance, a horn sounded, long and low, reverberating through my bones. It brought to mind an ancient sea creature calling from the ocean's depths. The figures on the beach began to convulse, as if the sound had a hold on them. They started to trudge en masse toward the water, each step burdened by invisible chains. I backed away, unsure of what to do, feeling the tide creeping up behind me. That's when the sky cracked open with lightning, and a colossal silhouette appeared on the horizon, something monstrous rising from the depths. It towered against the stormy sky. I couldn't make out its features, only its immense writhing shape. A wave of pure dread overwhelmed me, and I fell to my knees, covering my ears as thunder boomed. There was a flash of light, this time brighter than any lightning. A sudden sense of weightlessness overcame me. My surroundings blurred into white, and I felt intense pain in my chest, as if someone were pounding on it. My eyes snapped open, and I found myself surrounded by paramedics. My car's horn was still blaring somewhere in the distance. A paramedic was performing CPR on me, shouting something I couldn't understand. I learned later that my heart had stopped at the scene of the accident. They had to revive me with a defibrillator. Even though the entire event lasted only a couple of minutes, what I experienced felt like hours or an eternity. After my recovery, friends and family tried to console me with stories of heavenly lights and guardian angels, but I had seen none of that. Instead, I saw a realm of endless despair, a shore teeming with lost souls, and a monstrous entity lurking beneath the waves. The memory still sends shivers down my spine. Sometimes I question whether it was truly hell or just some twisted creation of my subconscious in those final moments. But late at night, I catch myself listening for that horn, half convinced I'll hear it calling me back. In those moments, I recall the faceless man reaching out for help, only to be dragged beneath the black waves. I've changed in ways I never anticipated. My skepticism of the afterlife is gone, replaced by a fear of what I may have glimpsed. A part of me dreads that one day I might find myself back on that shore with no chance of return. I never believed in hell. I grew up in a moderately religious household, but as soon as I was old enough to make my own decisions, I turned away from the idea of eternal punishment. My father was a deacon who spoke often of redemption and the love of God. Yet I always wondered, if God was so loving, how could there be a place of infinite suffering? 2 months ago, an undiagnosed heart condition caught me off guard. I was only 33 in the middle of making breakfast, when a sharp pain speared through my chest. My vision swam, my arms went numb, and I collapsed. By the time the ambulance arrived, I'd already flatlined. That was the beginning of the worst 5 minutes of my entire existence. I awoke in a corridor of monumental proportions. The walls seemed to stretch so high that I couldn't see the ceiling. They were made of black stone, etched with countless runes and symbols that seemed to shift whenever I tried to focus on them. The corridor extended in both directions, curving so gradually that I couldn't see where it ended. A dull, red glow pulsed from the cracks in the stone, accompanied by a distant, rhythmic thumping, like a giant heartbeat. As I ventured forward, I became aware of voices echoing around me. They were soft at first, a chorus of murmurs, but gradually grew louder. The wailing that filled my ears was unlike anything I'd heard, a profound, unending lament that reeked of hopelessness. Though I tried to maintain composure, my legs wobbled under me. Each step felt heavier than the last. Further along, I came across alcoves carved into the walls. Inside them were shadowy figures, bound by shackles affixed to the stone. Their faces were contorted in expressions of silent agony, mouths open in perpetual screams, yet no audible sound escaped them. The combined wails I heard seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. A nauseating wave of pity and terror washed over me. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Eventually, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. Its walls were lined with countless alcoves, forming rows upon rows of tortured souls. A huge pit in the center glowed with a sickly red light. I inched closer, peering over the edge, and saw that it was filled with a swirling mass of embers, coals, and something far more sinister. Shapes writhed within the haze, human silhouettes, clawing at each other, fighting to stay above the burning coals. Their screams, though soundless to my ears, invaded my mind as if telepathically forced upon me. All at once, an overwhelming presence manifested behind me. I turned to see a towering figure robed in darkness. Its face was obscured by a hood, but I felt its gaze pierce my very being. A single bony hand emerged from the sleeve, pointing into the pit. That gesture alone conveyed a message. I was next. Panic consumed me. I tried to back away, but invisible restraints tightened around my ankles, preventing me from fleeing. My breath came in frantic gasps, and tears blurred my vision. In a desperate act, I clasped my hands together as if to pray. I didn't know who or what I was praying to, maybe to the God I had forsaken, maybe to any force that could deliver me from this horror. The figure began to speak without words, its voice resonating inside my head. It showed me memories of my life, moments of selfishness, unkind words I'd spoken, people I had wronged. It magnified my every failing 1,000-fold, drowning me in guilt and regret. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing, convinced that I deserved whatever punishment this place held. Then I felt a distant tug, like someone yanking a fishing line attached to my heart. The robed figure vanished, replaced by blinding lights. The wailing chamber dissolved, morphing into the fluorescent-lit environment of an emergency room. The pain in my chest returned with a vengeance, and I screamed, my lungs exploding with renewed oxygen. Doctors and nurses surrounded me, their voices urgent and relieved. I heard one say, "We've got a pulse." Another exclaimed, "She's back." Confusion and fear flooded me. I could still see the horrifying corridor whenever I closed my eyes, still hear the ghastly wailing echoing in my head. My father, who had rushed to the hospital, clasped my hand, tears streaming down his cheeks. He whispered that God must have sent me back for a reason. The aftermath has been a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Friends tried to comfort me with stories of near-death experiences involving angels, white lights, and unconditional love. Mine was the polar opposite. I saw a place devoid of mercy, brimming with despair, a place I can only call hell. I began to question everything, my skepticism, my worldview, even my moral choices. Was my life so steeped in sin that I deserved a preview of eternal punishment? Or was this a cosmic warning, a push to reconcile my failings before it's too late? I don't have all the answers, but the experience changed me at my core. I've become more compassionate, more forgiving, especially of myself. I've sought to make amends with people I've hurt. I don't know if it will be enough, but I have to try. Sometimes in the still of the night, I hear faint echoes of that wailing. It seeps into my dreams, pulling me back into the corridor of black stone. I awake drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. Even though I'm alive, fear grips me, a cold reminder that the boundary between our world and that place can be terrifyingly thin. There is no simple lesson, no neat conclusion to what I went through. All I know is that I died for a few minutes, and in that span, I witnessed horrors that shattered my prior belief that death was simply an end. Now I believe there is indeed something after life, an unimaginable darkness awaiting those not prepared, or perhaps even those who are. The memory of those wailing walls, the robed figure, the swirling pit, they hover at the edge of my consciousness, a grim monument to what might lie beyond. And every day I pray, uncertain to whom, that I never see that place again,